And welcome. This week I'm investigating a brake shutter problem I've got with my Benelli 1130 TnT. Now this is a problem that I've had for a few months now. The symptoms are at moderate to heavy braking, at slow speed, you'll actually get a bit of a shudder just before the bike comes to a halt. One of the things that I initially thought it was I perhaps thought it was the steering head bearings. So I took the front wheel out and I actually checked the steering head bearings. And I noticed that whilst there was no obvious play in them, that when you turn the bars to the left and the right, there was a bit of resistance moving off from that centre position. So there's a bit of a notch in the steering head bearings. And I thought that perhaps there was just enough play in that to cause a bit of a shudder in the brakes. So I replaced the steering head bearings and I did a couple of videos on that particular procedure. Once I got that out of the way, I discovered that there was no real improvement to the brake shutter, so I thought it was time to investigate a little bit further into the braking system. Now the first thing I did is that I actually cleaned the discs with the view to removing any build-up of grime or dirt that had built up upon them that may be causing a bit of change of friction coefficient as the disc rotated, and that made no particular difference. After that, I actually checked the thickness of the discs, because if there's any variation in thickness of the disc around the rotational swept area, you can have issues with brake shutter. So I used a micrometer and I checked the disc at multiple points around the circumference of the disc. But I found that both discs actually measured perfectly. There was no real variation in the thickness of the disc. One of the other things that can happen with these semi-floating disc brakes is that you can get a build up of brake dust in the actual bobbins that hold the disc rotor to the disc carrier, which can cause the disc rotor to actually sit slightly off centre on one side or the other. And the way to fix that problem is that you put a nut and bolt through the bobbin and you rotate the bobbin round while applying a bit of compressed air to the gap between the disc rotor and the disc carrier. And that'll actually clean out any build-up of grime or brake dust in that area. None of those particular solutions alleviated my disc shutter problem, so I thought I probably did have a warped disc. So the next thing to do was to mock up a way of measuring the runout on the disc. Now the factory gives a specification of about 0.1 millimetre maximum runout on these discs, and by runout I mean movement of the disc from left to right as the wheel rotates. On my particular bike I measured the left hand disc and it had a runout of between 2 and 3 thou, which is well under the 0.1 millimetre limit, whereas the right hand disc had a runout of about 5 thou, which I think is about 0.13 millimetres runout, which is quite significant. And that runout was occurring predominantly over a fairly short rotation of the disc. So it actually looks like the right hand disc has actually developed a warp. So what I'm going to do now is I've ordered some new discs and I'll be replacing both front discs and the pads, and I'll see whether that cures my problem. Well, my new discs have arrived. I've actually gone with Metal Gear discs. Metal Gear is an Australian company and they offer a wide range of quality discs, and I've used their products in the past and have been quite happy with the quality of them. I'd certainly recommend that you go with a well-known brand as a replacement disc, because after all, the TnT is a sporting motorcycle and you certainly don't want to put a cheap Chinese-made disc on it. The model number for these Metal Gear discs are 21-069-A-GL, and the GL stands for the fact that it's got a gold centre on it rather than a black centre. One other thing you should note is that, like most discs when they come from the factory, there is a warning notice in here that says you must degrease the disc before use because there is a protective coating on the disc. For pads, I've gone with Ferodo metal sintered pads. These were the only pads I could get at short notice, but I have used these before and I've been quite happy with their braking performance. though I will say that they do seem to be a lot slower to bed in compared to Brembo pads that I've used in the past. Okay, let's move on to the next stage. Now, before I go any further, I would like to point out that working on a braking system on a motorcycle does carry an inherent risk if you don't do it correctly. If you are in any doubt about your abilities, please leave tasks like this to a well-trained professional mechanic. After all, you are risking your life and perhaps the lives of others if you do this work incorrectly. Okay, we need to take the front wheel out to replace the disc, so we'll just take the brake calipers off first before removing the axle. Now we'll just undo the two pinch bolts. Okay, now we can take the axle out. Now I'm going to remove the discs from the wheel. Before we fit the new disc, just make sure that this whole area is nice and clean and dirt free. Now we'll just torque them up again in a cross pattern. Now just turn the wheel over and repeat the procedure for the left-hand disc. Now just make sure that the spacer is in on the left-hand fork leg here before you refit the wheel. And you also want to grease the axle before you put it in. Now we'll just torque up the axle. Okay, now we'll do the pinch bolts. And now we'll refit the calipers. Just be careful because the pads can actually fall out of these. Now we'll just torque those bolts up. Now we'll put the other side on. Now we'll just torque those up. Well, that's about it for this particular video. All that remains to be done is for me to take the bike out for a bit of a test ride, weather permitting. It's raining here at the moment. Bed in the brakes and see if I've managed to eliminate that low speed shudder. I'll see you next time.